Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining in on our digging into the Bible. This is the topic of the sons of God. There are going to be a few lessons off of this topic because the repercussions of what they did are pretty amazing throughout the Bible, and it gets addressed. So the topic of today is the sons of God, known as the Watchers in Genesis 6. You can look in your concordance. You'll find the Watchers are another name for the sons of God, and they have a function in the book of Daniel. If you were to ask an Israelite why the world is so messed up, he would tell you because of their three rebellions. The rebellion in the Garden of Eden, chapter 3, and he would say the rebellion in Genesis 6 with the sons of God, the Watchers, and he would also say Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. We're going to kind of camp out here on the sons of God, Genesis 6. In my last video, we talked about Genesis 3 and talked about Satan, and the implications of the serpent in Genesis 3. So today is the sons of God. And if you don't know the divine council, you can go to my other YouTube video, and I explain the divine council in great detail. But as Dave knows, as he was there, God runs the cosmos through a council. He is created beings that he sits with. He doesn't need them, but he uses them just like he uses us. He doesn't need humanity, but he likes to work with his creation because God loves what he creates. He just loves it. So in God's great council, there are these beings that are given the title the sons of God. Okay. And so in Genesis 6, let's read the account in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 6, this is right before the flood. In verse 5, God decides to flood the earth, but we're gonna focus on verse 1 through 4. Let's read together. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Those 4 verses are compacting a very broad storyline. So he does it in 4 verses. And so he's packing it all in there. So if you're an ancient Israelite, you're well aware of the implications, but since we're not, we have to kind of go back into the context of what that is, okay? So you have these, what the ancients believed were divine beings, but that changed for many in our Christian tradition. They stopped viewing this text as sons of God being divine beings. They actually started to interpret that as there being human beings. I'll give you an example. Up until the 4th century AD, this was the ancient Jewish belief interpretation of Genesis chapter 6. The early church had some very prominent scholars, and they decided to change the interpretation, and that has become the interpretation in our tradition up until recently. The scholars always have known that this was referring to spiritual beings, but the interpretation of the early church kind of set the stage so the churches don't really talk about this really odd chapter in the Bible. It's really odd for us to go, wow, there are these heavenly beings that had a relationship with women. So to explain it away, they created the Sethite view, and that's basically says that the sons of God were just human beings from the line of Seth. After Cain had killed his brother Abel, Adam and Eve had another son, a very godly line of Seth, and he was a spiritual line. And the godly line of Seth intermarried with the line of the women of Cain, who were like the ungodly women. And so that's how they explain these incredible Nephilim that were created, men of renown, that they that they intermixed a line of Seth and the line of descendants of Cain together. Now, the problem with that is a very flawed idea because you have to impose that onto the text. That's not what the text is saying. They're trying to get an idea and make it fit into the Bible, which is bad exegesis. It's not how you properly want to interpret a passage. So let's take a look at the word sons of God and where else it's used in the Bible. So in Job 38, God is rebuking Job because Job is frustrated because he's being he's suffering and he's upset. And so God begins to question Job, and he asks him a few questions. He says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you must know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang, that's a reference to angels or divine beings, together, all the sons of God shouted for joy. So in Job, you have this scene where God is telling, he's speaking to Job, and he says, when I made the earth, the sons of God were shouting for joy. They were celebrating with God. The morning stars, the other angelic beings were singing, and these council members that God has, they're excited that God made the earth. And so you have in the Bible that these are not humans, because this is before the earth was ever created, and you have the word sons of God. So whenever you see a word in the Bible, the scholars like to find out where else in the Bible is this word used and how it's used to get a better understanding of the word. In Job chapter 1, and in the beginning of the book, we see that God is in heaven and he's having a council meeting, and the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came among them. So you have this meeting in heaven in a council throne room where God sits, and these divine beings called the sons of God present themselves before God. And this is in the book of Job. So already we're seeing references to these sons of God, and where they're located is in the heavens. Okay. You can also see that in Psalm 82. You can also see that in Psalm 89. There's plenty of passages that I just don't have, for time's sake, I don't want to go through all the passages, but there are plenty of passages. You can actually use a concordance and just type up sons of God, and you'll find it. The only caveat I'll tell you about the translations is that sometimes it uses the sons of the Most High. Sometimes it uses another phrasing for it. It calls them the heavenly hosts. So the English kind of obscures this actual literal translation of the Hebrew, which are called sons of God, which in Hebrew is B'nai Elohim. So you have that idea here. And so Peter in the New Testament, who had access to the Old Testament, obviously he's reading it, he's reading material. And so he writes this about the false prophets who were going into the church and causing damage by their sensuality. They were saying you don't have to live. Don't worry about your fleshly desires, because once you're spiritual, you don't have to worry about being pure. And so these false prophets were teaching things to the church or disciples, which were terrible. So Peter addresses the church in this letter, and he writes, "But the false prophets also arose among the people, just as," now let me just move this away here, over here, "just as there will be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality, and because of them, the way of the truth will be blasphemed. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep." And he goes on, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned," well, when did that happen in the Old Testament? "But God cast them into hell." That's a Greek word there. It's a translation word. It's English hell, but in the Greek, it's Tartarus, which I'll get to in a second. "He cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness, to be kept until the judgment. For if God did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought the flood upon the whole world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if you rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over the lawless deeds that he had heard. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling the passion and despise authority. As you can see here, Peter is looking back, and look at the context in what he's writing. He's writing about angels. He's writing, God did not spare them. God punished them. God, in the time he did that, it was, look at the chronology. The time of Noah, he brought the flood. That's Genesis 6. Sodom and Gomorrah, what was their crime? Does anyone remember the crime of Sodom and Gomorrah? I'm asking anyone in the audience here. Does anyone remember what Sodom and Gomorrah was? What happened? What was going on there?
They were sinful.
Mm-hmm.
One thing.
What were they sinful about? What was the story of Sodom and Gomorrah when Lot went over there and the 2 angels visited Lot? They said it's time to leave the city, and the 2 angels showed up to town, and the men surrounded the house, and they wanted to have intercourse with the angels. And so their sin was immorality. That was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so Lot gave him his daughters, and or tried to give him his daughters so to protect the angels. But the men of Sodom and Gomorrah, sin was sexual in nature. And so Peter is just kind of giving us his interpretation of Genesis 6 here. Now, I want you to notice a couple things. He's saying that the angels sinned, and in the context, it's in the Genesis 6, the time of Noah, and it's also he describes the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah and the sexual conduct of the wicked. Do you guys see the connection here of Genesis 6?
Yep.
Anybody else?
Yep.
Okay. Now, this word in the English is hell, but in the Greek, it's interpreted Hades or Tartarus, which is in Greek mythology. It is where the Titans were sent for punishment. And the Titans in Greek mythology were half God and half human. So Peter is writing in his context of the Roman Greco world that he's helping him understand the Old Testament, that they were offspring of spiritual beings and humans, and those were the Titans in Roman Greek mythology. And then he says to them that these angels that sinned were cast in chains of gloomy darkness. If we look back in Genesis chapter 6, it never gives us what happened to them. It just tells us what happened, but it doesn't tell us their punishment. Peter is grabbing information from material from the ancient Jewish literature, and he adds from the book of Enoch this very phrase that the angels were punished and were held in judgment until in these dark and gloomy darkness until the day that God judges them. So this is 2 Peter, and he's referring to the sins because these false prophets are so disgusting. He compares them with the disgusting acts of the spiritual beings in Genesis chapter 6, because they corrupted mankind, and these false prophets are corrupting the church. Okay, now the brother of Jesus.
So
go ahead. So let's have a question.
So the angels are divine beings, right?
Yeah, in the New Testament, the writers, they stopped using phrases like sons of God, the Holy One, Holy One. They stopped using all the names in the Old Testament, and they use a catch-all phrase called angels. That's what the New Testament writers, because they call any spiritual being in the Old Testament, they just call them angels. Angels, and is how they kind of just use that phrase in a general way. Does that make sense? Because what the New Testament writers are trying to do is they simplify the language. Instead of saying all the sons of God, they just say angels, spiritual beings. But we know in the Old Testament that angels had a job function, and that was to deliver messages to humans, for God to speak to the humans by angels. And so he's referring to the angels in the time of Noah for their sexual sin, which is directly, the scholars have researched this, directly correlates to Genesis chapter 6, because it's exactly what the angels did. And Jude's going to go into a little bit more. Like, here's more detail. Now, I want you to know, this is Jesus, the brother of Jesus, Jude. He writes, I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterwards destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he is kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desires, served as an example for undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So you have two authors of the New Testament referring back to these spiritual beings. They called them angels. In the Old Testament, they're called the sons of God, watchers, and they left their place of authority. The sons of God, that title, are the beings that sit in God's council meetings. They have a high authority in the heavens, and they left their position of authority. Peter refers to them as they despised authority. You see that? Peter gives a description, and Jude gives a description of an account that happened in the Old Testament of angels who left their proper dwelling place. Now, if we look back at that passage once again, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and they saw the daughters of men, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These are the authors of the New Testament drawing from the example of Genesis to teach the church about false prophets, and be wary of that, to live a holy life. And also in Jude, you see another mention of this about the acts in Genesis 6, again, leaving the proper authority of position, gloomy dungeon, same as Second Peter, and the context is Sodom and Gomorrah and their sexual immorality.
Mhm.
Does anybody have any questions so far?
Hey, Jay, on this passage, when the angels left their position and authority, it says they were kept in total chains under gloomy darkness until judgment. Where is that
Yeah.
place? Is that hell or something else?
Yeah, so the Greek word hell here is interpreted Hades. Hades, the underworld. So God keeps them in the underworld, and he has a special department called Tartarus, which is a dungeon within that context of being in the underworld. So God disciplines them. Now they got this information. For God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. See that word hell? It's Tartarus, Greek. They got that from Second Temple literature. So a lot of the ancient Jews had a lot of writings and commentary and insight into the background of the Old Testament. And so a lot of their writing goes from 500 BC to 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. And one of the literatures, one of the materials they had was the book of Enoch. And in the book of Enoch, they reference what God had done to the angels, gloomy chains and a dungeon.
Mhm.
Okay. So the Holy Spirit working through Peter thinks it's important that we know from the material from Enoch to put that into the Holy Scriptures. So there's that information coming into the Bible. The authors were very comfortable using Second Temple literature to put into their letters because that was kind of their material to draw from. In other words, they had a library and they tapped into that library as they were writing. Another example is when Moses died and he's not able to go into the promised land. And in the Old Testament, he dies and his body is buried in this mountain and nobody knows where his body is. In the New Testament, in Jude, Satan and the archangel Michael are fighting over the body of Moses. Well, that's not in the Old Testament. That's only in the New Testament. So where did they get that information? From the Second Temple literature, from the writings of that time. They drew that information and they put it to explain to us there was a spiritual battle over the body of Moses. I was like, wow, that's super crazy and intense. But that's kind of the material. Just like any author, if I'm going to write a book, I need to have material to reference, right? I have my little notes at the end, my little bibliography of I'm right. So that's what the ancient writers did too. They're writing materials, so they're drawing from material that they have access to. And so for the not spare the angels when they sin, but they cast them into hell. To the Roman Greco world, they're like, oh, that's just like the Titans. It's just like, hey, they're familiar with that language, okay? And they're obviously punished for what they did, okay? So you have these sons of God who marry human women. Like, that's weird. How can spiritual beings have sex with women, right? And we're like that. And so a lot of the early church fathers just couldn't process that. So they reinterpreted the passage and they removed that supernatural view. Even though it's right there in the letters, they removed it. And so the Christian church for 1,000 years, I mean, from 400 AD on, very, very, very few churches of Christ will ever teach this, because if you rely on church tradition, you'll miss the ancient context. The ancient context is not the early church fathers. The ancient context of Genesis is the Second Temple literature. That's the context. They're giving you the context. So that's the literature that they drew from and that we should draw from. Now, there was a time that some of these books were actually in the Bible and they were removed. But just because it's not considered inspired, we know that the writers of the New Testament, they use that material. So even though it's not inspired, it's still very important information. So you can extend your Bible study. Okay. So
Gio,
question.
So these angels, the sons of God, sent down as watchers to earth, and this is because to guide the humans.
Good question. Now they came down there and they married women, and you think it's innocent, right? Like, oh, they came down and.
What was the original purpose for them to come down to earth? Great
question. I'm going to get to that. That's a part of this topic.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to get to that. That's a great question. I like her thinking. You must be an engineer. You must be an engineer. Okay.
Gio, I have a question.
Go ahead. Is that my lovely, beautiful wife, Karen?
Okay, so if the angels who rebelled against God are in Hades, how in chains, then who are the demons or other things that in the evil and the spiritual forces?
So that's a part 2 of this lesson, but I will give you a tantalizing clue. Okay. When Jesus confronts these demons who have entered into the humans and are harassing the humans, he's confronting the spirits of the dead Nephilim who were killed in the flood. That is what the New Testament refers to as the unclean spirits.
Wow.
When you think of unclean, the mixture is wrong. It's things that should not be mixed are unclean. Spiritual heavenly beings and humans produced an outcome that was an illegitimate line of creation.
Mhm.
Okay, so when they die in the flood, their spirits are restless, and they're called the bastard spirits because God did not make them. His rebellious sons of God and humans made them. And so they roam the earth and harass the humans, just like the Nephilim harassed the humans while they were on earth, as we're going to take a look.
Mhm.
So great question, Karen. But that's part 2 of our study here. So let's continue. So in the conquest of the promised land, it gives reference to these Nephilim and their descendants. Okay. Now, you may ask, well, I thought they got killed in the flood, and then most of them did, but I'm going to explain that in a second. But first, let me explain. They were given different names. So the Nephilim were the direct children from the women, and then they had children and children and children, and there was this clan of giants that existed. Okay, and so they were given different names depending on where they lived. And they always were referred to as the tall and strong people of the land, okay, in the land of Canaan. And that was the land where God commissioned God's people to go into, okay?
Mm.
So in Deuteronomy chapter 2, it gives a little history lesson here that Moses is telling the second generation of what's happened. And when you approach the territory of the people of Ammon, do not harass them or contend with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as possession, because they're the sons of Lot, and I gave them that land. So don't mess with, when you go to the promised land, don't mess with Ammon. Just leave them alone. I gave them as possession. It's their land. Leave them be, because that line was non-elected, but God wanted to protect them. God's pretty awesome. It is also counted as the land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites called them Zazumim, a people of great and many, and as tall as the Anakim. So you have these Rephaim, you have these Zamzumim, and you have the Anakim. These are all like different clans of descendants of the sons of the mixture of women and the divine beings. And so there's this massive tribes and clans of giants that live throughout this area. And it says, but the Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place, as he did for the people of Esau who lived in the Seir, when he destroyed the Horites before them, and they dispossessed them and settled there. What had happened was, before the people of God got there, Esau's people had already engaged them and fought them and pushed them kind of further out. So part of their job was done, because the descendants of Esau, who was the brother of Jacob, who was the brother of, was the son of Isaac. Remember, that's the line that was not elected to have the Messiah. So you have these families, and one of their children is the land of the Messiah, and the rest of them are still worshipers of God, but they're just non-elect. And Esau here and his people were fighting these guys, and so they kind of pushed them out. So God wants them to go around this bend and drop into the promised land and confront them. Okay. Remember their parents before them were scared of the Nephilim. They saw them and they're like, ah, and they freaked out and they didn't want to do it. And that's when Caleb was like, let's take the land. And they sent the spies in, and Israel got all scared, and they had to march around and live for 40 years outside the promised land, because they looked over the hill and they saw the giants. Okay. They saw these ginormous people. One of the descendants of the Nephilim, and you guys, you read your Bible in Deuteronomy 3, they go through these towns and they have to fight these massive people. And in Deuteronomy 3, it refers to King Og of Bashan, and his bed was 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. I mean, that's how gigantic this man was. Okay, so just to give you an idea, as you read your Bible, you seeing these giant people, because they're the descendants of the Nephilim and the descendants of the Anakites. So different population groups are still growing. Okay. So some of the origins, just to give you this background, in Numbers 13, they originally go to take the land. They're originally going, hey, God gave us the promised land. Moses said to take it. And when they had spies there, they looked and saw the inhabitants of the people that were of great height. Just to give you an idea, Goliath was 9 feet. Okay, just to give you an idea. And he was like descendant of a descendant of a descendant of a descendant of a descendant. Okay, just to give you an idea, right? You know, my son Jaden, he's a descendant of a descendant of, he's 5'7". So, I mean, just give you an idea. It's like, okay, tell me, all right? Okay. And they saw that they saw the Nephilim, the sons of Enoch, who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. So they were frightened of these giant humans who were powerful and warlike. If you remember Goliath, he was a champion. He was a killer. He was ruthless, and he was a fantastic warrior. Let me give you an assumption that people make about this idea that angels and humans can intermix. One of the arguments against that is in Jesus's time, the Sadducees are calling Jesus, well, what if my brother marries this woman and my brother dies, and then his brother marries her and his brother dies, and his brother, you know, who's gonna be his wife in heaven? Remember that argument? You guys remember that story?
Mm-hmm.
If a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow, raise up children as brothers. And, you know, there's 7 brothers among us. The first Mary died, and then he has a bunch, you know, it goes on. So the woman's married to a bunch of guys on the earth, and then they die. They're asking Jesus, well, who is going to be the husband in heaven? And so Jesus answered them in verse 29. You are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, they will neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. So that people say, well, this is the reason why that Genesis 6 passage doesn't make sense. Now, the context for that statement is the resurrection, which refers to the afterlife. The reason why marriage is on earth and producing children is to populate the earth. When we are all in heaven and living in heaven, there's no need to populate heaven. The point is clear that in the spiritual world, the divine beings there have no need to procreate. It's only made for the earth to procreate. And it never says that they can't have sex. It never says that spiritual beings cannot have sex with humans. It's just saying that in heaven, there's no marriage because there's no point in marriage, because you're not trying to repopulate heaven. The story is at its end, and those who are in heaven are not there to repopulate heaven. And so if you also look in the Old Testament, you find that angels appear as men in the New Testament. When Jesus was ascending, 2 men stood there and says, the same Jesus who went up is going to come down the same way. And they were described as human-looking men. In the Old Testament, God would come down in human form and visit Abraham. So all these interactions of God becoming physical was all peppered throughout the Old Testament, that he would come and interact with humans. And the ultimate act of a spiritual being becoming human is the birth of Jesus, right? Spiritual, comes in, born of Mary, born a human. So the idea that this is impossible, it doesn't make any sense, because the text says otherwise. But people, again, they're trying to take away those supernatural worldview and try to humanize it. But that was the context of the ancient times. That's exactly what they believed. That's exactly what's going on. Any questions with this assumption? Any thoughts on this one before we go on? Okay, so the phrase in Genesis 6 has this: the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man and bore them children. So there was this, they were on earth, the flood came, and then there's still descendants of the Nephilim. Well, how can that be? I thought when God flooded the whole world, everyone died except for Noah and his family. Okay, remember that? How can the Nephilim survive if God flooded the earth? And so there are two answers for that. And depending on your opinion, both are safe answers, okay? The first one is that it was a local flood in the region, that God flooded the region locally, right? He flooded and then he got most of them, but some still survived and then repopulated. That's one. The scholars are obviously divided on that one because there's some kind of evidence for a global, because all the flooding accounts from ancient cultures have the same flood stories, or they can look at it as it was a regional flood that flooded the area. Or in the Hebrew, the word "and afterwards" could mean that the sons of God returned back to earth after the flood. They were there before, God flooded it, and they came back afterwards. So those are two answers the scholars give us as to how you want to view that, because of the descendants still existed, even though God flooded the earth. There were still Nephilim multiplying and making children. Does that make sense? Those two.
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't matter which one you believe. It's if it's a global flood and the angels came back, it was a regional floods and they all didn't die. So that's kind of the scholar's answer to that question. So what happened? What was their intention? Like, why did they come down and marry women? What was what Roland said earlier? Were they here to help humans? Were they there to build us up and encourage us? Since they came from heaven. In Genesis 6, verse 5, the following verse, you have this line. So you have the sons of God came, gave birth to children. And then look at what it says in verse 5. The next verse, the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. So right after the Nephilim were born into the earth, now it's compacting the story, of course. He's kind of giving you an overview of the story. The earth became so evil. And so the understanding is that these sons of God were not here to help mankind. They were here to harass and destroy mankind. And the Lord was grieved that he had made man on earth, and his heart was filled with pain. This is in the same context of the sons of God coming down, the same context. And God floods the earth to restart his creation story. So this is what we understand from the actions of the Nephilim, the actions of the sons of God. They produced wickedness. Now, in the cultures around Israel, they took that as those were wonderful people. They helped build Babylon. They helped build our great cities. Those are the wise sages of our creation story. The stories of the nations surrounding Israel, that was their story. The gods came down. They made a mixture, and we had these amazing wise people that helped us build our great cities. That's the literature of their day. The Bible writers are going, no, those were not good guys. They were evil, and their intentions were evil, and they made man wicked. So the writing of Genesis is arguing against the literature of its day. It's posturing against and saying, no, that is not the account. And so the Genesis account is arguing against the literature of its day, because in that ancient Near East culture, that was the understanding of what happened. Everyone kind of understood that there was these divine beings that mixed with humans that made these great people, but they took that as that was really good. And the authors of the Bible and Moses says they were evil, and I'm going to show you how and why they were evil. The book of Enoch gives us insight into what the sons of God did to mankind, what they did to them. they began to teach humans the arts and technologies such as weaponry, fighting, violence, warriorhood, right? How to be efficient in the art of killing. They also pass on to them knowledge of cosmetics, beautification because of immorality, mirrors, sorcery, and other techniques that would otherwise be discovered gradually over time and by humans. It was not given to them all at once. It was just introducing the forbidden knowledge. And that taught humanity the resolving of enchantments, dark arts. It taught humans to make knives, swords, shields, how to devise ornaments and cosmetics, astrology, meteorology, writing, ink, paper. So all this stuff that were being imparted on them made mankind violent and wicked, because that's how in the ancient world all the violence began, because of wars. Where did they learn that? Sons of God. The book of Enoch gives a lot of great detail into what the motivations were, what they taught the humans, and what they allowed them to learn that made them turn and made them corrupt and made them turn on each other. And that's how these nations became so violent and so wicked that God flooded the earth. So this is a reference book if you want to read about this in great detail. It's called Reversing Hermon by a scholar, Hebrew scholar named Michael Heiser. It's a great book. I have it right here, actually. Just give you like a reference. It's a great book. A lot of in this book is the work of the scholars. So it's all scholarly work. This is not like some commentary. Commentaries don't give you the scholarly work. It just gives you little tidbits. But there's a lot of scholars that put a lot of information out there for us to read and kind of gain some understanding. Any questions on this? On what the sons of God? Go ahead.
Oh, the book of Enoch. Enoch, that was during Genesis, the book of Genesis time frame. Was that?
Okay, so it wasn't the actual Enochian person who went to heaven.
Oh.
These are the writings of. They use a thing called pseudepigrapha. They were writing about Enoch in the Genesis background. They were giving. So it was a Jewish writer, a human writer, writing this information, but they used the name Enoch to give you a reference that this is an old Genesis a background into the Genesis account. So they use his name. So the Jews would be like, "Oh, Enoch, we know him," and they would begin their writings because they're speaking in coloring the background of the Genesis account. They were giving some color.
As I was looking at this, it kind of looks like this is how Satan used to distract us from God. Because like when I see mirrors make women insecure, mirrors. So you're never good enough. And then like writing and ink and paper, school and all this stuff that takes us away from learning about God. I was just thinking about that.
There's many more, and they have these names. And as we go on in this study in part 2 and 3, I'm gonna show you how Jesus interacts with these descendants of the demons and the whole idea of these sons of God, because their rebellion was understood to be the sons of God versus the sons of God. They wanted to create their own creation. They were not supportive, apparently, of God's creation of humans. They wanted to make their own creation from their. But the other spiritual beings, they don't have the ability to make things. They're just created beings. It's like, I can't create anything. I'm created, so I'm the creature. Creatures can't create stuff. Only God can. So, despising authority, leaving their proper dwelling place, they went down to the women, and they had children with them, and they were making their own sons of God, their own human creation, and they were warped and evil. And so, as you can see here, these Anakim descendants, they lived apparently in the promised land, and that was the land where God's people were supposed to go. Can you imagine that? They were in opposition to God. They placed their descendants right where God wanted his people to be, and they said, no, we're taking that land. That land is ours, God. So there are two oppositional forces, God versus his creation sons of God, and their unclean mixture of humanity. And God's sons of God are the children of Israel, the nation of Israel. And here they are fighting on the earth, just like God is fighting these spiritual battles in heaven. God is on the earth. You see it played out with the descendants of the Nephilim and the nation of Israel in a clash. And that's what's the background of the entire Old Testament, is there's this clash of God in his human family, the nation of Israel, and the spiritual family who's rebelled against him, trying to overtake God's plan. So Israel is tasked to destroy them from the promised land, not just dispossess them, but to completely annihilate them, because that is a forbidden bloodline. They took a bloodline that was not the bloodline of God, and so it was forbidden. So God makes a point to write into the Israelites, to Joshua, I want you to completely eradicate their bloodline. And that meant women and children, because their bloodline. Now, other nations, they did not completely destroy. They just kicked them out. They won the war and they booted them. They didn't show ruthlessness to them, because some of the actual people of Canaan that lived in the promised land weren't descendants of the Anakites. So they were just dispossessed. So the ones that were, they got completely eliminated. Okay. So, and you can read the scripture in Joshua 11, that Joshua removes all the descendants of the Nephilim in the promised land, except some left without dying. And so they left to the cities of Gaza, Ashkelon, which are in the land of the Philistines. And guess who was in the land of the Philistines? Anyone want to guess?
Giants.
Giants. Who? Give me the famous giant.
Goliath.
Goliath. And who's he fight?
David.
The son of
Oh,
the descendants of the elected line,
Mm-hmm.
where Jesus comes, fights the corrupt line of the sons of God in battle.
Right.
That's why that story's in there. Because
hmm.
God is saying, I am confronting the unauthorized bloodline of my rebellious creation, fighting my people on the earth, the nation of Israel. And David and Goliath, that's why the writers put that in there, because it all still stemming from Genesis chapter 6. And it goes through all the way to the New Testament. And so the descendants of the Nephilim were completely destroyed when a city had them, because they were trying to mate and have children and make giant clans. And so David fights one of the last ones. Goliath had a brother, and there was another guy that had 12 fingers and 12 toes, and they killed him. There was one time a giant, when David was fighting against the Philistines, the giant says, I'm going to kill David. But one of David's mighty men jumps in and goes, I'm going to take you, and he kills him. So those were the last remnants of the descendants of the Anakim, the Nephilim. And so that's where the story ends, that God had finally eradicated the rebellious offspring of the sons of God. That's why that story is. But now in part 2, their spirit, when they died, floats throughout the earth. And so that's why you have them in the New Testament. Demons. Okay.
The live spirits still floating around somewhere.
That's right. Demons, demonic spirits. That's right. These sons
going
of gods.
back.
Go ahead, David. Question. David, go ahead. David, was that you?
Oh, yeah. It said on the line, said Israel is tasked to destroy them from the bottom. So that means the nation Israel destroyed the Nephilims?
The descendants. Because remember that these are the descendants. The Anakim. I'm sorry. Oops. The Anakim. See the Anakim here? I see my cursor. So the descendants of Nephilim, as generations went down, they had different names that people knew them by, the giant people. So they were the Anakim giants. They were the Emim giants. They were the Rephaim giants. They were the Zamzumim giants. and they were the Amorites were giants. So a lot of these giant clans were in the promised land. And that's why the very first wave of Israel saw them and got so scared, they go, we're not going in there. We're not going in there. And so the guy goes, because of your unbelief, you will not enter. And they had to roam the desert for 40 years. And then their
Right.
children grew up, and God says, okay, I want you to go around this side, because in these 40 years, Esau and his descendants cleared out some of these guys. I want you to go out and clear out the rest of these guys. And Joshua goes and does that. And he either destroys them or they flee to the land of the Philistines. And that's where you find them fighting David.
Okay, so Gio, so back to the purpose of these sons of God coming into earth was to harass the mankind,
Right.
what you said. So these sons of God, these angels, we consider them as fallen angels from today's.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
these are
Fallen, rebellious, opposing God.
opposing gods. So they marry with humans, created this Nephilims, and the Nephilims' descendants became the demon, not these fallen angels or demons.
Well, the Nephilim, when they were killed, the direct descendants or the creation of the Nephilim, they're dead when they died in the flood or died in battle. Their spirits were unclean. They didn't belong in heaven, right?
Okay.
So their spirits, and they had to roam the earth. That's what the ancients believed. They roamed the earth, and they were demon possessing and harassing humans. Because you have to remember, the Nephilim were lethal enemies of Israel. Lethal enemies. They were fighting them constantly. And so the dead Nephilim in the New Testament, as we'll see in our next study, are the fallen spirits, or the spirits of the dead Rephaim, the dead Emim, the dead Zazimim, and the Amorites. Yeah.
And
Tons
those
of
are demons that we consider demons today.
correct.
Okay.
See, normally people think demons are fallen angels. That's incorrect.
Yeah.
The fallen angels are the sons of God, the watchers. The fallen angels are the guy in Genesis 3, the serpent, the cherubim. You know, those are fallen, meaning they decided to rebel against God.
Right.
They made a decision. Genesis 3 and Genesis 6. And the byproduct of their rebellion was this lethal enemy of Israel, fighting and scaring them. And they were in the promised land for a reason. They were trying to claim that as their own, because they were in opposition to God. So that's why God raises up Moses, raises up Joshua, and says, go deal with these guys. You got to get rid of them. They're lethal enemies to Israel. And so that's what Joshua does. And he does it pretty effectively. But not all cities were completely destroyed. Some were they lost in battle and they took over. And there was no Nephilim, because they were looking for the giants. That was their mission, looking for the giants and eradicating them. And so that's what they did. But not all the giants were eliminated, except for a few who escaped to Philistine. And you can read that in Joshua 11:21. It's a good passage to read. So what are the implications for us? What are the lessons we can learn here from our Bible? That these sons of God wanted to create their own humankind. They rebelled, left their position, they despised authority, and they wanted to create their own creation, their own bloodline, an illegal bloodline, okay, in direct opposition to God. They couldn't create like the Most High, so they created sons in rebellion. So there was this animosity and jealousy that God was creating humans, and they weren't too fired up about that. They made their own humans to corrupt the humans. They didn't like humans. A lot of the rebellions comes because these spiritual beings had a problem with God making humans. They had a problem with us being physical and spiritual. They had a problem with that. For some reason, they didn't like that. And so there's these rebellions in the Bible that they're working against mankind. And so they taught man wicked acts to help accelerate the destruction of mankind. They were not here to help us. They were here to destroy us. to manipulate us, to ruin us, because we were made from the Most High God. They didn't like that. They wanted their creation to destroy and dominate mankind. So this is why it's important for us to put on the full armor of God. In Ephesians 6, Paul acknowledges these principalities, these dominions of darkness, these sons of God who have rebelled. They were powerful in heaven, powerful beings who rebelled. And so Paul is saying, hey, look, guys, put on your faith, put on your faith in the word and your Bible, put on your armor, your helmet of salvation. We have to arm ourselves because this is a spiritual battle. It's a battle of, taming our sexual desires. It's a battle of living a righteous life. These sons of God want to ruin God's people still. That's why they demon possess a lot of the first century Jews. And also, if you notice, and we'll get into this next week or next time I do the study, that the demons were only found when Jesus went outside the Jewish towns into the Gentile towns. That's where he found the demons. Like, remember when he went across the Lake of Galilee and he ran into that guy who was cutting himself with stones, and he was breaking chains, and when Jesus asked him, he's like, what's your name? He's like, my name is Legion, for we are many. Remember that guy? That was in Gentile territory. That was not in Jewish territory, which is an interesting irony of God's dominion over his people. These demons weren't allowed inside God's dominion. They had to stay on the outside, as we'll learn later. And Jesus goes into those areas to confront those demons. And it's pretty epic. It's pretty awesome. Wow. So next time we get together, we'll do a part 2 on how the sons of God play a part in the ministry of Jesus. And we'll see that war play out as well.
Okay, wait for a sequel.
Any comments or thoughts or feedback on this?
I love it, Gio. Thank you so much. Just so much that I kind of understood why God had to, command the Israelites to go into the cities and kill every woman and child and even animals. So they can't possess the animals. So I'm thinking, so maybe the animals were also probably been not influenced, but they're probably like genetically mutated into something that these creatures created, because they want to create their own animals. They want to create their own people. So I kind of like understand, like, okay, that's probably why that God had allowed that to happen, because told them to do that, because you can't mix them into his creation. Correct. A pure creation. So yeah, it's really good. Like something that I kind of understand. There's so many questions I have, before becoming a disciple and after becoming a disciple. So this is great. Thank you.
Thank you, May. That's great. That's a great thought. David or Roland, any other closing comments?
Interesting is that, even though you're in heaven with his angels and with God they're leading, there's still some individuals that think they can do better.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting to me. It's kind of weird.
It is. And this is why God always writes, God opposes the proud.
Yeah.
Gives grace to the humble. There was some jealousy, perhaps, just despising what God wanted to do. Remember, God decides, with his creation, like when he says, let's go make man in our image. God decided that. And sometimes God's decisions are not welcomed in heaven. And so these 3 rebellions take place. There's 3 of them, big rebellions in Genesis. 3, the serpent, 6, the sons of God, and 11, the other rebellion of the humans and rebellions of another batch of the sons of God rebel against God. So And this explains why the earth and our whole world is so messed up.
Yeah.
So messed up because of these things that have happened. But if you look at the beginning, God knows these are going to happen, and he has the plan to redeem and fix all these problems.
Mm.
It has to do with Jesus, and it has to do with his resurrection.
Yes.
So when you
Amen.
read the New Testament with this in mind, you'll start connecting some dots. I'm going, oh, and you
Mhm.
start connecting these, because
Mm.
that's the whole layout of the Bible, is Genesis 1 through 11. The rest is just a storyline that's giving you the details of what's happened in these accounts of the rebellions, and it's just kind of giving this epic saga of how God redeems man despite these rebellions. So
Okay, Gio, one more question.
yeah, go for it.
So Satan, or the one that deceived Eve, so there's one of the fallen ones. So I'm assuming that he is also detained and in the deeps or whatever God put them in,
Good
and
question.
stayed there. And do
question.
they have any communication with the demons that are the spirits or their descendants
Okay.
that are?
So there was two questions there. One was, is Satan in the dungeon? And the answer is
Mhm.
no. The answer is no, he's not. We know that because he tempted Jesus in the New Testament. So he accumulated some power. So the devil is kind of the lead opposition, the leader in the New Testament. All these different rebellions, he seems to come out as one of the leaders of the
Mm,
rebellions. So he's not caged. He's not in a dungeon. The second question you asked, do they communicate? There is some form of communication, because there's some coordination with the sons of God and the devil being called the prince of this world. So he accumulates some form of power and authority over the rebellious spiritual beings, that he is the lead opposition in the New Testament,
wow.
the lead opposition. But there are others, but he's kind of in the lead, and the writers hone in on him. They call him the serpent, the devil, Satan in Genesis 3. So over time, he has accumulated power.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. He's called the prince of the air, the prince of this world. He has a lot of very powerful names that Jesus says this guy has a lot of authority, not more than God, of course, but
Yeah.
he has a lot of authority on the earth.
Right.
And you have to remember that Satan, the devil, Genesis 3, he was put as the chief lord of the dead, the underworld. That's why he's called Beelzebub in the New Testament, the Lord of the Flies, the Lord of the Dead, because he has legal right and claim to the dead souls. That's
I
why it's
see.
so important to be a disciple and baptized into the name of Jesus, so he doesn't have authority over you. He has no
Right.
claim to you. You are the New Testament sons of God.
Right.
You see how that works in the New Testament? The language the same. These
Right.
rebellious ones are replaced by the human sons of God. And that's the whole message of why Paul writes, you are the sons of God, because in the Old Testament, a lot of them rebelled, and we become the new sons and daughters of God.
That made them pissed out some more, I guess.
Yeah.
They're
Good
being
stuff.
replaced.
Yeah.
No, I don't like
And,
that.
well, you notice we take their place, because Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6, guess who judges the angels?
We are, right?
The sons of God. You guys,
That's right.
all right? We judge the angels, right? We judge because we're replacing them in the heavenly realms. We
Awesome.
replace them. Isn't that pretty amazing?
That's
That is
amazing.
amazing.
So stay faithful, guys. Hang in there till the end.
Right.
Hang in there.
So your title,
Awesome job, Gio.
Gio, your title is Sons of God, parentheses, the Watchers.
Mhm.
I look at the Watchers as a positive thing. In this case, it's not, right?
Yeah. The Watchers are in your Bible. They're in the Watchers is another name they give the sons of God in Daniel, and they're good. They're good because they're helping mankind. They're helping Daniel. If you read the book of Daniel, they're helping him. And the Watchers, they make certain decrees and they help God fulfill his punishment of Nebuchadnezzar. So the
Okay.
Watchers are bad and the Watchers are good depending on the context.
Okay.
These guys are the bad Watchers and they're also good Watchers. Just like in the heavenly realms, we have obedient, faithful, loyal, supreme, not supreme, but spiritual beings who help humans. God helps him. There's this good spiritual war going on, and then there's the rebellious ones who are coming
Yeah.
to manipulate mankind, deceive mankind, trick us, hurt us, harm us, and get us away from God. Because they know their destruction. They know they will lose, but they're going to take as many as they can with them.
Yeah.
And that's the war.
Great
So,
listen to you.
yeah,
Thank
in
you.
2 weeks, I'll go into the ministry of Jesus and how these sons of God, Watchers, Nephilim, play a part of that with demons.
Cool.
Okay?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're
Thank you,
welcome.
Gio.
Awesome, G. Thanks. Can't wait.